right now I'm training as a purpose guide with the Purpose Guides Institute and feeling really excited about that, feeling quite enlivened by it, which is the point, I think, with purpose. But it's definitely been quite a journey to kind of get here. So my background has always been in writing of different kinds. So journalism for a while, charity communications for a while, brand and marketing is what I'm doing at the minute in my existing business. But the whole time I've been running a business that's been about brand marketing, tone of voice, narrative, identity, all these sorts of things. I've also been training as a transpersonal counselor, which is again just about having this like bigger perspective on what's going on, bringing in all these kind of new skills around like listening and guiding people. And I wasn't really sure where that was taking me. I knew I didn't necessarily want to be a counselor. So when the kind of purpose guiding opportunity came up, it just, yeah, it spoke to me and it felt right. So that's the journey I'm on at the minute. And part of that work, I suppose, is finding my own purpose. So I think with all the sorts of best or most useful programs I've done, this element where you do your own bit first before you necessarily help other people. So whether it's training as a counsellor, like the first year of that is going, well, what's my stuff like and how does it get in my way? Same with purpose guiding. It's like, well, what's my purpose and how might I then take that and use that to help other people find theirs?
I'm curious about this whole aspect of what's out there and this need to find something that we can fix or do something about or change that I believe most people, when they think about purpose, that's what they're thinking about. What's this pain in the world that I can address, or what is this social issue, challenge, problem that I can change? Is that how you thought about purpose initially, or what's your journey of understanding purpose?
Good question. So yes, the first one, I should probably just explain that when I talk about purpose, I'm also talking about like soul level purpose, as in SOUL, so which is a kind of specific way of thinking about that rather than just a general purpose. So I this way of phrasing it, I got abducted by soul, which is another way of saying I had a big kind of creative burnout and so I was on one path and abruptly stopped on that path and realized that whole way of working and living wasn't really working out for me. And to be honest with you, my starting point for purpose wasn't even necessarily about like, how can I go out into the world and help to fix something? It was more like, I've been living in this way and working in this way and really hasn't worked for me. And I know that I don't want to do it anymore, but I don't quite know what I do want to do. And sort of having a period of kind of really quite intense searching and frustration. And I know this old thing isn't right, but where's the new thing? And quite a challenging time, I guess, around that as well, to sort of try and see where next and what would actually feel good and in alignment, if that makes sense. And in the middle of it, it's quite hard to make sense of it. It's like, I know I've got all these skills, I know I've got all this passion, I want to direct it somewhere, but I can't quite figure out where. And I'm doing this thing and I don't want to be doing it. But and so it's been a weird time. So yeah, I think I know some people come at it, and I think that's amazing as well to come at it with that social purpose. For me, I was like, had an even more fundamental purpose, which was fundamental driver, which was like, how can I actually start to enjoy my life and feel like I'm really providing something useful in the world?
I don't know, for some reason the word meaning
Mm.
springs to mind. I don't. What for you is the relationship between what I'm hearing you describe as purpose and this idea of meaning?
Good question. Meaning. Well, as humans, we're making meaning all the time. We're making stories out of everything. Like there's no such thing as a neutral perspective. We've got a lens on how we see life and we're making meaning all the time. So I suppose, how can we uncover a sense of deeper, truer meaning? So find the lens that's true for us and start to bring that out into the world. And I guess meaning does connect into that idea of feeling useful, feeling of service, feeling that kind of we're not just here on this planet to kind of mess about for 70 years and I don't know, have some nice experiences along the way and meet some nice people, and great, those things hopefully will happen, but like that there is something a little bit, there is a reason why we've been asked to live here on this planet at this time in this particular form.
There's you said something before around this isn't working for me now, but I don't know what it is that will work for me. And so there's this transition of going from one way of living to trying to find another way of living, and then that messy bit of what is that? What do I do now?
Yeah. And it is messy. So I call it like the butterfly metaphor. So if you think about it, you're a caterpillar, and then at some point you're going to become a butterfly. So as a human, what I want as a like impatient, kind of ego-y human, I'm like, I just want to flick a switch and I just want to be like, this thing doesn't work. Can I just flick the switch and start the new thing? And can it happen tomorrow? And can it be really easy? And can it be completely effortless? And can I not have to do anything hard at all? That's what I want. No, what it's more like is you're a caterpillar, you go into your cocoon, and at a certain point, like, you dissolve into goo. That's how it works. Before, like, in between being a caterpillar and becoming a butterfly, you have a whole phase which is just being a whole load of goo. And then from that goo, a butterfly emerges, and you really have to fight your way out of the chrysalis. Like, it doesn't just got part the ways. And it's that kind of process that I think helps to prepare you for whatever that purpose is. Yeah, it is a crazy laugh, Sandy, because I'm like, wouldn't it? I still wish I could be like, yeah, I'm just gonna put the switch and it happens. But yeah, the kind of the struggle is part of the story. The struggle is part of it. It's not like it's not because something's gone wrong. It's because changing and transformation, and whether it's a butterfly, whether you use an alchemy metaphor, there's always a bit that's about things. When you look at a hero's journey or heroine's journey, there's always a bit that about this is really hard and frustrating and difficult, and I don't really know where I'm going.
I think to some extent, any creative endeavor there's always a messy bit. So I think it's just levels of messiness, maybe. So I think even me and Carlos, we're getting clarity on what we're doing, but there's always an element of, you can never be too clear about what you're doing. So I think probably depending on what stage you're at, I know you've read the book, the Second Mountain book, where he talks about this valley between the two mountains. That makes me think of that. This idea of you're on a new adventure and you're in that liminal bit where there's a bit of uncertainty. It's exciting, it's scary. Both of those emotions come up. But for me, I think there's something around it being a journey. One thing, it is a journey. It's not, like you said, flick a switch and it's done. Feels to me there's a understanding that it's an evolution, a process that gets clearer. So I like the metaphor of the statue that hasn't been carved yet. You're just chipping away at the rock, and then eventually it starts to become clearer what that statue might be. And that's certainly been my journey, is understanding that purpose for me has been more, I would say, process of elimination in some ways. Like understanding I don't want that. That's not good for me. Something there is good for me. I start to get more curious about that and just sensing and responding. And then over time, that picture becomes clearer. But like you said, it's frustrating because you want it to be now. You don't want it to be now. And I think that's one thing we see with people is we want to help them get to that point, but also you can't force it because it just doesn't work. It just feels too much like I need results. I want full clarity today so I can move forward and get to where I want to get to.
I've been thinking about this a lot because for me, I feel like a garden metaphor really makes sense. So like I did a whole bunch of clearing out, like the metaphorically speaking, clearing out my brambles, clearing out all the weeds, having this patch of kind of bare earth for a while. And for a long time, you're looking at this bare earth and you're like, well, nothing's happening. And it really doesn't feel like anything's happening, but it is all there kind of going on under the soil. And when I try to rush things, which I do all the time, like I'm not coming to this from some point of like, oh, I'm now super spiritual and I never, ever like get this wrong. I still am really impatient. I still want it to happen quickly. But, it's like, if you plant some daffodils in October, you probably don't go out and start shouting at them in November and be like, come on, why haven't you bloomed yet? What's going on? Like, things take time to bloom and blossom. So we sometimes have to accept that sometimes we're under the soil.
So we've got caterpillars and chrysalis. We've got journey. We've got rock. We've got
can you tell she's a writer?
What we're giving is people lots of different pictures to create in their minds and see which works best for them, which I think is important about this. There's an aspect of here that from my experience of sort of working with entrepreneurs, making this transition to work that aligns with who they really are. And that's, the core of this is that's great, but who am I?
Yeah.
What is that alignment supposed to mean? So there's this, in one sense, like as business owners, as change makers, there's this idea, what's the vision? What is the world that you want to create? Where do you want to go? But in absence of that, in absence of being on this journey where you don't necessarily know exactly where you're going, you just got a vague direction, how do you guide yourself? And what's that compass that you're going to use? And what I was really intrigued by talking to you, Marianne, and given what myself and Lawrence are exploring and trying to help others explore, is this idea of being guided by joy, or being guided by this, as I'm going to say, inner sense of well-being, this inner knowing or inner acceptance, whatever it may be. There's this feeling like, okay, I'm going to trust something else other than what's going up here in terms of logical thinking.
So yeah, it comes back to that kind of quote, that the place where your deep gladness meets the world's greatest need. So what is your deep gladness? So I know for me, it's felt like a bit of a breadcrumb trail. Like I haven't had a kind of immediate sense of like, yes, it's this. But at every stage, can I follow the bright spots, the things that feel the most good, the most energizing? I think often we get into this very problem solving mode. And I know that's a trap I've fallen into. It's like, I don't like this thing. So how can I change this thing to make it better? The good thing about me is I've tried lots of different things and lots of them haven't worked. I've made loads of mistakes. So I've wasted a lot of energy problem solving. And actually what's been the most helpful thing has been like, what do I love? What do I enjoy? What do I do effortlessly without trying? And how can I expand the bright spots rather than trying to kind of endlessly get in this cycle of what is it, what should I be doing, and how do I change this so that it becomes this? And in terms of what that looks like, I think it is a sort of a felt sense of rightness. It is that sense of flow that you get when you're really absorbed in something. It's not that you necessarily have to feel it all the time, but it's like, what are the places and the activities and the ways of being that support that feeling of joy, flow, energy, and how can you have more of them? The other thing that I think I found this really helpful is that this idea of purpose as being and doing. It's not, I think we can get a bit over focused on the doing. So the model that I'm learning in is that we all have this kind of mytho-poetic identity. We all have this core identity within us that speaks to who we are and what we might do in the world. And we have like a number of delivery vehicles that we might express this purpose through. So our purpose isn't the same as our job title. Our job title isn't our purpose. We have this deeper core, this deeper identity, and we might manifest that in all kinds of different ways. We might manifest that in terms of how we're a friend, how we're a parent, how we're a partner, how we show up in the world in loads of ways. And our work is just one delivery system, and we might try one delivery system and it might be great, and then we might change it. So I think there's something about it's helpful to separate those two things as well.
What springs to mind is whether you believe we live in an uncertain world or whether it's a very linear track and you just do this thing and continue doing it and it won't change. And how, given the past couple of years we've been living in, given how I believe the world really works in terms of there's not much you can control, how can you respond from a place of power, for want of a better term, a place of certainty, so that whatever you do, it can change, but it's always still coming from your own deep sense of well-being, wellness, acceptance, knowing where you're going, what you're here to do, in a sense.
Yeah, totally. I think that comes from like maybe having and finding like what your core values are and what you really want to stand for in the world. So we don't get to choose, do we, what's happening around us? Like we have choices about what we do, but we don't get to, like, none of us asked for COVID happened. So in the middle of that, it's like who do I want to be in the middle of this? What do I want to stand for in the middle of this? I can't control, there actually is very little I can control outside of myself, but I have limitless influence on how I choose to respond, how I choose to react, who I want to be in this. So for me, for example, alongside my like whole mythopoetic identity piece, so this whole kind of thing, like I've chosen for myself 4 words that for me are like my guiding values. And for me, that's trust, connection, compassion, and joy. And every morning, I have a little moment where I feel into those things. And if I'm facing a challenge in the day, it's okay, what do I need here? Do I need a bit of trust? Okay, everything is going to be fine. Do I need a bit of connection? I need to check in with someone else about this. Am I bringing enough joy into it? So in a very kind of, and you don't have to do it like that. That's how I've chosen to do it because I found it quite helpful. But just some sense of what is at the core of me that actually is unchanging, even if no matter what's going on around me. And the job and the work and the relationships and everything else might change, but there's something in me.
So I'm going to play a bit of devil's advocate here.
Go on. Why not?
Channel his inner Jeremy Paxman.
Oh my word, I'm scared already.
But there's this element of, that's so self-indulgent. And it's like, why? That's all well and good, you feeling happy and nice. That's not how the world is supposed to work. You were supposed to be helping each other, and life is supposed to be a struggle, and we're supposed to be, striving. And if it doesn't have any effort in it, it isn't worth doing.
Yeah, totally. And I have a story running in my head that things have to be hard. I have to work really hard to be like, oh, if I don't struggle and effort and grasp, then I'm never going to get anywhere. So yeah, I have that story running. So the thing that I think is really interesting about this, like, and that idea of it being self-indulgent. So I came across this whole purpose guiding work. Like, I found it in a very roundabout way, but the starting point for me was reading a book that was actually about environmental activism. And on the face of it, you sort of think, well, how environmental activism, finding your purpose? Maybe if your purpose is to be an environmental lawyer, those things link. But what I've come to understand through doing this work is the most important thing you can do for the planet as it is right now and for the future of the planet that we're all living on is to find and embody your deepest joy and to find and embody your deepest purpose. And if you think about where we're at, and if you think about the way that like consumerism and loneliness and isolation and all these kind of challenges that we're facing as humans, like I believe that we're trying to fill this kind of lack of meaning and this lack of soul with all these other things. And that's kind of part of why we're in the mess we're in. So finding a way to be happy, content, in flow, in alignment, like it is making us a better human and is creating a better world. It's one of the best things and the highest purposes we can have is to find, live and embody our joy. Active Hope is my favorite book about the environmental crisis that I always recommend because it's about we have choices, like we can do something. We're not at the end of the story, we're in the middle of the story. Like we can do stuff.
Reminds me of Seth, the place we did the retreat last in September. He talked about inner activism and how he'd see a lot of environmental activists actually burn out because they were all about the world and the problems and fixing other people, not actually looking closer to home, like you said.
We talked a bit about this before, didn't we, Marianne? About are you the best person to solve that problem? And are these people who you feel you want to help wanting your help?
Yeah, I think sometimes there can be the spirit of like, oh, I have to go out into the world and I have to help people and I have to go and like work for charity or be a charity or do, and if that's your deep gladness, then great, do it. That's brilliant. But if you show up with the energy of I'm here to try and make myself feel better and actually I don't really want to be here, you're probably not helping the other person and you're certainly not helping yourself. So yeah, I think anything that's about I should be doing this, I ought to be doing this, I should be living in a different country and not, I don't know that's not necessarily the right example, but anything that's like this should is probably not particularly helpful.
And so in terms of shifting these shoulds then, what in your work and this purpose guiding, is there something that you've discovered that helps people not get guided by stuff that isn't really for them?
Yeah, definitely. And I think this is where probably the combination of some of the things I've learned around therapy and intergenerational stuff coincides with some of the purpose guiding stuff, which is like to some level or another, we're all living a purpose. It's just that if we haven't examined it, we might be living a kind of default purpose that isn't really ours. So we might be living a purpose that's been handed down to us consciously, unconsciously by somebody else. We might be living a purpose that society is telling us to do and we just haven't even noticed. So the first step really is examining what are we believing about the world and what are we believing about ourselves, and just this idea of shame and kind of clearing shame. And it's true, it is like looking at what are all the things that I'm believing about what's happening around me and not even trying to change them to begin with, but just almost making a list and going, oh yeah, here are the things that I seem to be, here are the lenses that I'm putting on the world. Oh, everything has to be really hard. Oh, I can't trust anybody. Oh, I have to make a certain amount of money to feel worthy. Oh, I'm not allowed to make money or I'm not worthy. Whatever the thing might be. So as soon as we can identify what are our sort of default beliefs and our default purpose, then I think we can start to clear through them a little bit, work through them, get a better understanding of this is something that's passed down to me because 3 generations ago, this belief made perfect sense. But oh, look, I actually haven't updated it. And now something really different is true. And yeah, I think it's that kind of clearing space rather than necessarily adding new things in to begin with, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It seems very clear and simple to me. There's a way of looking at the world that's pushing you down a certain direction and you question whether that perspective is really your perspective or someone else's.
Yeah.
That transition though, of then shifting, saying, oh yeah, that isn't really me. Who am I? For some people is bloody scary. And it's like, oh, I don't want to go there. I prefer to plug back into the matrix and do what what my pre-programming told you to do.
Yeah.
If someone was out there thinking, oh, I really need to do this, but I don't know, it feels like it's going to go into complete chaos, and then I have no idea what's going to happen then. It's really scary. How would you invite someone to look at that in a different way to avoid? Because it feels like there could be a butterfly on the end of that journey. Trying to mix metaphors so badly. But that messy middle bit that everyone was talking about before is like, that's just, I don't want to be there. That's like a dark despair that feels just too painful to go to.
I think that our soul is speaking to us all the time. And if there's something inside of us that needs to be birthed out into the world, like the energy and support will be there to do it. And I guess that's what that can look like, is actually a sort of slow, gradual process. So actually that whole kind of big bang thing of I'm jacking everything in and I'm going to do this, like sometimes that might be appropriate. I've quit jobs without having another job to go to twice, and both times it worked out really well. But it doesn't have to be that. It is about, I guess that's where it comes back to that idea of a breadcrumb trail and small steps and moving in the direction of soul. And once you're on the path, you're on the path, and the messy middle is going to happen whether you want it to or not. I think this idea that we can kind of prevent it or stop it or change it is like, we can't. It's just that is what's going to happen. But yeah, I guess we can support ourselves by having company. So not feeling like we have to do it on our own. And whether that's through a therapist, whether that's through a purpose guide, whether that's through an amazing community like this one, which I think is genuinely transformative, like all of those things can help support us. So it's not that you have to do it on your own. But yeah, I think understanding that the messiness isn't that I'm failing, because it has felt like it sometimes. It's that it's messy because something different is happening. And the ways of being and the skills and the tools that I learned in the old world don't necessarily serve me anymore. So I'm having to learn new ways of being, and that takes a bit of time sometimes. And Louise mentioned spiraling. Spiraling for me is the motion to think about in terms of any change. We tend to think about change as being like this kind of upward curve or climbing a mountain, but actually change and growth is much more of a spiral model. Like we keep bumping into the same things again and again, and we keep learning from them, and then we grow in a different way. So I think that's really helpful.
Well, I was just thinking about the word trust, really, when you mentioned it as one of your keywords. And I wondered how much that plays a part when you think of, what did you say, something about moving towards purpose or something like that? It makes me think of, ultimately, it feels if you can trust in yourself, then you'll start listening to that more versus doubting yourself and getting swayed by other people or society's view on what you should be doing.
Yeah, I think it is about learning to trust myself, definitely, and ourselves. But I think it's also learning to trust the universe, like learning to trust the bigger picture, that we don't see all of it. And so sometimes things that feel hard to understand, like we don't have to understand them. Like we're not in charge of, none of us, like we don't run the universe. Like we're here to live our version of our best life, but actually there is this whole bigger picture. And I like the reason that I have trust as a value is not because I find it easy. It's because I find it really hard. So I have to remind myself every day. And there's this lovely quote from Einstein, actually. He says, the one fundamental question that we can ask ourselves as a human is, do we believe the universe is a friendly place or not? And that doesn't mean that bad things might not happen. Bad things do happen, of course. But do we believe that the universe is a friendly place? You know, are we going to, at every point, are we going to choose trust? Are we going to choose love? Are we going to choose connection? Or are we going to choose like fear and disconnection? And really, like all choices probably just boil down to that, don't they? It's the Marianne Williamson return to love. Is it love or fear? Is the universe a friendly place or not? And if the universe is a friendly place, then no matter what's happening, there's something useful that we can take from it. Yeah. So all the challenges that I've had over the last 4 years in terms of not knowing what I'm doing, feeling frustrated, feeling stuck, like how useful are they now for me now as I start to guide people through purpose and change and transformation?
What I heard earlier was this aspect of being with others or doing this with other people, navigating this journey or going through this spiral with other people. What is it from your perspective or even your own personal experience that might just have people just try and work it out on their own, and the challenges that you see, or maybe the benefits of trying to do it all by yourself?
I think so. Again, it can be like an old story that we're running. So for me, I have a story from the olden days of being a young'un. that like, I've just got to figure this out on my own. I've just got, and it's one of those, sometimes it's such a kind of sneaky belief that we don't even know it's there. We just think that's how the world is. So that I think there's certainly a kind of proportion of people who will have this sneaky belief running in their head that, especially if you, she says modestly, if like me, you believe yourself to be a reasonably smart individual, you're like, well, I'm a clever person. I got loads of A's at school. I just need to, if I just sit and I just need to figure this out. And this idea that it's very rational and that it's very heady. So I think that can be a reason why we can believe that we have to do it on our own. I think that there is a piece of the work that is just us, to be fair. So like there is a piece of the work that's about, because this is work that's going inwards, that's not about getting other people to do that for us. But I think it's more, can we have company as we go on this inward journey? And certainly if I think about it in terms of the challenges, all of my learning from therapy is this idea that like the wounds or the hurts or the challenges that we have in life happened in connections. They can only really heal in connection. That's why reading a self-help book is great, and I've got a lot from reading self-help books over the years. But if we really want to change something, the change only happens in connection with another human, because the wound or the hurt, or whatever you want to call it, happened in connection with another human.
In terms of your journey, since we've known you, I've known you, seeing you be part of the community, you were on the program and then you started to contribute more. So you started the Right Club, which was a weekly space or bi-weekly space to come and, write together to build that habit. And so it was interesting seeing I'm just thinking from a really practical point of view, seeing how you showed up to that and then realized, actually, I don't want to be helping people to write. But what I saw from that was people loved the space you created. And I could see you really blossom in that space as a coach, as a guide, as a facilitator. And so I wondered whether, like you said, this kind of reflection from others, how important that is in terms of you realizing, I tried that, but I didn't enjoy that particular focus.
Yeah, and I guess it's that kind of learning by doing piece, isn't it? And again, if we're thinking about connecting to deep gladness, like we can have our idea in theory of what we think will make us happy, but it's not until we put it out on the road that we go, oh, actually, this thing that on paper makes total sense. Like, I've been a writer for 20 years. I write songs and poems and plays. Oh, and creativity, maybe that's where I should be going. And actually it's like, oh no, okay, that's not, I love my own writing and I love my own creativity. But if I think about the journey that I want to help other people on, then actually that isn't the journey that is the one that I want to guide people on, because that hasn't been my biggest struggle. And I want to guide people on the journey that's been my biggest struggle. So I guess it's a kind of learning by doing, and learning in connection with others, because again, it takes it away from being theoretical.
I'm curious about this connection between this personal sense of purpose and knowing that you're in the right place, or you're able to be guided by a joy or in a sense of knowing.
Mm-hmm.
And then how this relates to, we are the Happy Startup School, starting new businesses, doing work in the world. Are you able to see how they marry up, connect, contribute to each other? Are they totally separate? Are they connected?
So for me, when I have been trying to launch a business without the connection to soul purpose, like I just haven't got very far, and it's felt so frustrating. I'm sure there's people like Lawrence, Carlos, you've both heard me like literally tearing my hair out about like, why can't I get any
I remember you saying this, like,
traction
about not just yourself, everyone. Why is it so hard for people to actually get shit done?
Yeah, it is really, exactly. So for me, the connection is, and again, like this is so, I've been in the community for ages, and this week I'm doing a Friday Firesid with you, and I had a lovely chat with Francis and Simon on Monday. Why now? Why is this happening now? For me, I connected into what my soul purpose is, and what that gave me was a sense of energy and excitement and enthusiasm that gives me the fuel and the momentum to go out there and do it. Because starting a business is hard, I think. I mean, it doesn't have to be crazy hard. I'm not saying, I don't mean, it's a real struggle, you'll do it. Of course it isn't. But there are parts, if you start a business, you will run into challenges. Of course you will. What's the fuel that's going to get you through? If the fuel is just coming from your ego, then you might find that it runs out quite quickly. Or you might do what I did in my old job, which is that kind of, I'm being fueled by ego, I'm being fueled by, I want to get to a particular job title. I'm gonna fuel myself with 15 coffees a day and working too hard. And oh, look, I've had a massive burnout. So if the fuel that you've got for your work is either the fuel of like validation from somebody else or a should sense, like when you get to a struggle, like you might not be able to get over the hump of it. When you're fueled by the energy of a soul purpose, you're like, oh, I'm just going to find a way to hop on over this, or I'm just going to, because, and again, this is just my experience, because all of a sudden I've got like the motivation and the passion to actually do it and to do things that might not be instantly straightforward. So that's what it's given me, a sense of energy and kind of feeling enlivened by it.
I think when we had the idea of the Happy Startup School, for me, it was like, this has to happen rather than I want this to happen.
Yeah.
It's a subtle thing, but just in terms of a feeling, it was more, there was an inner knowing, I don't know what you call it, but it was like, this is something coming through us, through me, that I feel is just going to happen. It wasn't even like I would like it to work. It's going to work because I want it to work. And so I wonder whether for you, does that feel different in terms, does it feel like this has to happen for you, or are you still open to, right now is all I need is to have this motivation to move this idea forward?
I think that having the motivation like at a certain point, if there's something that needs to exist in the world, it can come to exist through you. Like if something needs to be birthed out into the world, it will happen. I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, I guess for me, if songs happen, like I sit down to write a song, I don't really know how they happen, but they just appear through me. I'm not even a particularly talented, I'm not a very skilled musician, I'm a beginner, but somehow there's a song in the world, and by sitting down with a guitar and having some attention and focus and putting some time and space to it, like kind of songs appear. And I think maybe the same is true for other kinds of, because business is a creative expression. Business is a super creative expression. So the things will come. I think that's my sense.
Where I'm at is this idea of well-being and work, and how following this idea of tapping into this soul purpose, connected to that soul purpose, to connect to this inner purpose, that being the source of well-being rather than the tangible outcomes and structures and strategies that we create through work. Because as much as I agree with Lawrence, there's this, in a sense, you're channeling something. Maybe there's the Happy Startup School was something that was to be channeled and to be created. I'm at a space now where I love talking to people. I love doing this. I love holding space. I love learning. I love reading. I love this idea of how can I find a way of being happy and doing work and putting food on the table, and not to feel like, oh, what's going to come up on the future and how am I going to achieve that goal? And that to be just like, oh, that's that, whether that's the Happy Startup School, whether that's, I don't know, some other thing that comes up. We've had various ideas, but each thing in itself is just something that brings joy for the sake of doing it. And sometimes it makes money and sometimes it doesn't. And how that, when you're talking about this kind of, every business is a kind of a creative endeavor, I agree with you to a point, depending on the system or the framework that you're looking at. Because I think there's a lot of people who see a system of money and transactions, and there's some rules to be played by, and they're just following those rules. And there's other people, I feel, who are just trying to create their own rules around work. And so there's this element of actually, my understanding for you, by following this kind of purpose route, this inner purpose route, what happens outside doesn't really matter in the end. You will find what needs to be done, and you'll do what needs to be done, as long as you're always aligned with what makes you happy.
Yeah, I guess there's a few things around that. So the first thing is, I think that, well, I guess if I think about it in relation to goals and achievements and where you're trying to get to, so any goal that you can think of, there's usually a feeling state attached to it. Even if you have a money goal, I have plenty of goals around money, but it's like, what's the feeling that I'm trying to achieve with that? Well, I'm trying to achieve a feeling of security and stability. Or if I want to get on X amount clients or whatever, but that's because I want to feel like I'm being useful or valuable. So I think there's often a real value in focusing on the feeling state and actually experiencing I think sometimes we do it backwards, rather than being like, oh, I need to achieve this goal in order to have this feeling. The thing that kind of probably works the best is, what's the feeling I want? How can I experience even more of it now? and then I'll probably be more likely to attract the things that I want. So I think that's one part of it. And then in relation to money, so I talked to you about this before, Carlos, but I think I really like this idea of we're all trying to navigate these things. So there's the sacred dance and there's the survival dance, and we need both. So none of it is about, oh, I'm just going to give everything up and live on air for 6 months because my passion tells me that. It's not that. We're humans. We're living in a human world. We're not living in a spiritual dimension. We're living in a human dimension, even if we bring a spiritual or a soul or a whatever expression, makes sense to you. So yeah, it's fine to make money. It's important. Like, it's part of what allows us to keep manifesting what we want in our lives. But can we do both? Can we do the sacred dance and the survival dance? Yeah.
I'd love to see that dance off, maybe at summer camp.
I'm a big fan of interpretive dance. So anyone who wants to come and do a sacred dance, survival dance session with me, yes, why not?
Crazy legs, head spins, body popping.
Yeah, exactly.
Before we finish off, is there anything that you'd like to share with people watching if they want to explore more about this kind of going inwards around purpose, or they'd like to hear more from you? Where would you point them, Marianne?
So my plan for next year is I'm training as a purpose guide. So I'll be taking on a few pro bono clients for that to go through quite an intensive soul purpose discovery program. But alongside that, I'm looking at running some different events, programs that are all about pathways into purpose. So this idea that I think there's quite a lot of different ways to come at this. So there's a way that's about navigating by joy. There's a way that's more about looking at the obstacles. There's probably some ways around creative expression, story, myth. So just creating a whole sort of suite of ways into purpose for anyone who's interested in exploring purpose a little bit deeper with me. So it's a kind of a watch this space, because I've been a bit too much in my sacred dance this week. I've been having lots of very lovely soul discovery sessions. And yes, Thanks, Lawrence, for put friend on LinkedIn. I will actually start to, after a year of not after about 4 years of not promoting anything that I do whatsoever, I will actually start promoting things, but not in a scary, spammy way. Maybe, I don't know, I might be scary.
Maybe that's your survival dance.
Just if you are interested in doing this work, I would encourage you to explore this. If you have been spending a lot of time trying to work out outside, what am I supposed to do, what problems am I supposed to solve, what changes, and it just hasn't been working, or you're being overwhelmed with analysis paralysis trying to understand and think your way through it, then I really encourage you to see what Marianne could offer you, and to hear her stories and journeys around this.
Thanks, Carlos.
So before we leave, some closing thoughts. Where have you got to through this conversation? And any epiphanies or deeper understandings?
First of all, this idea that chaos is a positive. And I think that's something that I think this whole idea about the creative void, so that bit where there's nothing happening and it feels terrifying, but that is actually a really creative part of the process. So I think that's something I would want people to go away with, especially if you're in the chaos. Feels really terrifying, but it's okay. And I think just this sense of, I think somebody talked about being a burden as well, and that was my fear. Like, oh, what if my soul purpose wants me to go off and do something I don't want to do? But actually, like, for me, soul purpose has been just incredibly energizing and enlivening. So if it doesn't feel energizing and enlivening, it's probably, I mean, don't get me wrong, we all have like our day-to-day admin. I'm not saying we can never look at an Excel spreadsheet, but if it's not, if the core of what you're doing isn't energizing and enlivening, it's probably not connected to your soul purpose.
I think there's always that fear, isn't there, that, oh, I need to do this. This isn't my next project, work out my life's purpose, and it feels big and heavy, and so it's easy just to avoid it and just put the blinkers on and forget it. So I say just try and enjoy the journey, because the messy middle is where the fun is, I think. And it sounds like Marianne's on that journey of getting opportunities come your way and then them feeling exciting, whilst also trying to work it out, rather than trying to work it out and then doing stuff.
I think the thing I'm going to take away, this difference between the sacred dance and the survival dance, or these two dances that we're potentially trying to do. And I think of silent disco, and where you have this, you can just switch the tune. So on one tune, I got this idea of this like really creative, I'm just going to move with the motion, and this is all going to go like this, and you're just doing your own thing. And then you switch it, and then everyone's doing a line dance. And that's the survival dance. There's this system. We all, money and marketing, and we're all going to this way that we all done. And then just trying to switch between those two dances, really, I feel is an interesting view for me, because I think that more internal creative gonna move how I want to move thing.
Mhm.
That yeah, you can having a bunch of people doing that in a room. A is hilarious, but B just seems completely different to the world of business where everyone seems to be line dancing to the same tune.